Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again with a Cospri's build. I haven't done a Cospri's build in quite a while. It's pretty meta and one of the kind of go-tos for cast on crit, which don't give you too much flexibility because it's just cold skills. So, you know, you kind of do the good stuff and then a lot of the builds just kind of look a bit similar, I suppose. Icespear, Frostbolt, Ice Nova, Creeping Frost. Either way, I did want to use the MTX that the pass thing had, whatever, and wanted to take a bit of an approach to it that maybe I hadn't done before or others hadn't, and I wanted to use Creeping Frost for the first time. So I haven't actually used Creeping Frost as a attack based tool. I've used it in damage over time once, I think, but apparently it can hit pretty hard since with more projectiles Creeping Frost will overlap, and you use the alt quality. You can stack some quality if you really want, but that does become pretty costly and fairly like one-dimensional in that you have to go all in on that route. So I did a bit of a hybrid, and here we've got Creeping Frost in the chest attached to Bladestorm for cast on crit, and then in the Cospris I have an Ice Spear, and I went with a Scion perspective for a lot of charges. So as you can see, my charges last a minute thanks to the Scion Forbidden Flesh and Flame combo. Now those give you +1 to charges and also 400% duration. I then looked for a chest that had +2 AoE +2 proj for my Creeping Frost, and it was a relentless whatever chest that has a duration on it. So in the end, combining that with the Scion charges gives me really long charges, meaning sustain's really easy between boss fights and phases and stuff, but ultimately it doesn't really achieve much. In this type of build you can get your power charges up almost immediately, your frenzy charges up almost immediately, even when stacking them. It's just for, I guess, bit of different flavor. So for Scion, I tried to do Bladestorm cast on crit as well instead of Cyclone as the typical one. Cyclone's very melee, and on some boss fights, unless you have really good DPS, it doesn't feel particularly good. And as well as that, I found Cyclone for extended periods of time might start hurting my wrist. So I wanted to try something a bit different, and Bladestorm has been working out pretty well. So you throw out a Bladestorm in the sand stance and it just floats towards enemies, and then it still crits things and throws out spells originating from you towards the enemies that it crit. So it does make for a fairly decent little clear mechanic. I think Cyclone's going to be just a bit faster if you've got the area for it. And as well as that, I tested Blade Flurry, which we'll see in a second. But Bladestorm itself seems really nice for what it is. Once you've got the right amount of crit and attack speed, because then you can become more of a ranged character with Cospris. Ideally, I think Lancing Steel, something like that, might even be the best situation, but for Cospris you can't use anything that's sort of ranged because it requires a melee crit. And these Bladestorms are technically still melee crits, so it kind of turns you into a bit more of a ranged character. And that lets you do damage when you otherwise wouldn't be able to do damage on some boss fights and Ubers and shit, and hopefully just makes for a slightly nicer experience against some of those pieces of content compared to Cyclone. We have to be very melee, and if it's a particularly melee unfriendly situation, you have 0 output at the time. So that's the deal with Bladestorm. All you got to do is really fix crit, because it feels like an all or nothing sort of thing. You throw out a Bladestorm, if it crits, then it crits all the way through. If it doesn't, it doesn't, and then you just wasted an attack. So it does get a bit iffy on that regard. So this is a Blade Flurry test as well. So I pretty much tested everything, and Blade Flurry held up really well too. The proc rate with good attack speed seems to be really nice, and you can shit out a lot of spells, and they're in a very directional area, so you're kind of just unleashing hell towards a certain area very comfortably. The only issue is it's a whole lot of standing still. It's basically channeling just at its worst, because you have to stand still, and the only time you're doing anything is when you are performing that attack and standing still. And for some boss fights that's definitely bad. So for the end game stuff, I didn't really like Blade Flurry. I tested against just a couple bosses, but it did seem to have pretty good output. Cyclone's also very melee, has that problem, but at least you're moving around all of the time. So in the end, I did stick to Bladestorm for now, and this is just an Uber Maven. I tested one boss, like I did a few little bosses here or there, and then one Uber so far, which is Maven, and it did go fairly well. It's still very much a mechanical fight. My character has capped suppress, has good life regen, bit of leech, and a lot of evasion. And on top of that, you can see that we sometimes get elusive with increased effect, but DPS was nothing too special. It still was a bit of a mechanical fight, and it is also hard to see anything when there is a whole bunch of shit going on, especially with the vortex on left click for chilling with bone chill. Ultimately, I don't know, it's just another Cospri build, I think, but tried to take a bit of a different spin to it, and I'm not too sure going this Scion route was worth. Like, it's mostly for the extra charges, and then I'm a Deadeye and Elementalist on top of that, and it's quite possible just an Elementalist, an Assassin, an Inquisitor, any of those by themselves would have had a lot more output in the end, and not really lost anything that I tried to gain in this build. But it was a bit of a different thing, and I'm happy with it either way. Very fun to map with. Cospri is still just terrific item, and got to level 94 pretty quick. Might still try a bunch of Ubers. Like, I'll try some of them out, and if things are going well, I mean, maybe we'll have another video. Otherwise, yeah, I'll just show you how I built it so far, and we'll go from there, I guess. So here is my current character, level 93 Scion, charged me 30 bucks. Stacking charges using the, what do you call it, Vault Pass Cospris, which just looks like a cool sword, basically. I think it has some effect as well when you channel, but I didn't notice it when I was trying anyway. Just, yeah, kind of looks like a cool, big, pointy icicle. In any case, build is based around the Cospris, but more about, I guess, I wanted to do Creeping Frost and use the alt quality, which is this over here. With 20 quality, you get fires an additional projectile. The more projectiles you have and the more overlap you have on them, the more sort of damage it'll do, because they each count as their own individual hit. So to just give maybe an example of that, this is what Creeping Frost looks like. Just shoot it out over there. When it condenses really tightly onto one spot, it will overlap and it will do many different hits of damage at once. So I then just looked for chests that had +2 AoE, +2 proj, since Tainted Fusings are pretty good at the moment. And this one was up for 1 Divine. I then went to linking it myself through the fusings and all that. It was pretty easy to link, and I decided, since I'm using this chest, I'll try and build around charges. So that's why I went the Scion route. Otherwise, I wouldn't have actually gone a Scion at all, I don't think. That just pushed me in the right direction there. The chest itself doesn't really achieve too much in my build, like a bit of extra movement speed for frenzies, which doesn't help all that much. Some life regen for endurance. I've got 4 endurance, so it's a bit of extra regen, but I'm not currently keeping them up during boss fights, even though easily could with an enduring cry. Like 1 minute charges is insane, but it just, I don't know, it doesn't really help much, so I haven't bothered. But yeah, we're building around the Uber version of this Scion Jewels, which is Unleash Potential, +1 charges, and then 400 duration on kill, all of that. So the 400 duration just gives it up to 50 seconds immediately, and then we're basically going for the +1 power charge since I'm trying to use Badge of the Brotherhood. So that means that the more power charges you get, your frenzies will stay at that level as well. So I've got 9 power charges thanks to Warlord hat, which I crafted with Awaken Orbs, so just +1 max and then -2 cold. Awaken Orb together, boom. Awaken Orb's pretty cheap, Redeemer Orb's pretty cheap, like, yeah, I don't know, not too bad. Grabbed a +1 max power charge shield, which was 20C base, something like that. And then just crafted it to do some suppress, and I guess it filled out some res as well. So that's all it does. So 1 there, 1 there. You get 3 on the tree, +1 to that, and that does give us 9. I think you could have just gone an assassin. You didn't even really need 9 charges either. Like, it's just trying to make more of more. But something like 7 or 8 works pretty well as well. an assassin, inquisitor, elementalists. You could go Deadeye, you could go Raider, taking some Deadeye nodes. There's a lot of flexibility for this type of shit. And this is just one example of the build, which probably isn't even the strongest example, but is what it is. This is the character. So Badge of the Brotherhood, we've got the +1 charge there. We're using Cospris, and in the Cospris I have Ice Spear, Power Charge on crit, and GMP. Once again, Ice Spear, if all the projectiles hit, then more projectiles, more damage. And not too much else to really say there. Power Charge on crit's pretty damn strong when you have 9 charges. Otherwise, the links here are Bladestorm, crit strikes, which I do need for Bladestorm to crit higher and higher. Because I'm still not even at 100% crit, I don't think, whereas an Assassin or Inquisitor would get to that crit a lot easier. Creeping Frost, a GMP, which just reduces the cost, which isn't really necessary. I got it when I was maybe trying to be a bit mana-based. Crit damage, and awakened cast on crit. So the Divergent Frost actually ended up becoming a 21-23, so I just temple slammed it near the end of the stream yesterday. Was on like level 19 for most of the video. And then yeah, that makes it like a 15 to 20 divine item, which I'm gonna sell. I think I just use a regular Creeping Frost so it doesn't look any more special. Then grabbed some boots. I Redeemer Hunter slammed some together, and then just rolled elusive on crit every single time with Harvest. If you use the crit reroll, you get elusive every single time. And I was just trying to go for boots that did something decent on suffixes, but got life regen, increased effective elements. Thought that was too good, so kept it, but I was just trying to get some resists. Increased effective elements just means that my shock from Elementalist is going to be a bit better, my chill is going to be a bit better, so it's not too bad. Made a belt that just has some strength, and then the regenerate ES as a suffix. That's what keeps up your energy shield really nicely with Eldritch Battery against rares and bosses. Otherwise, you just get lots of recharge if you have about 1,000 ES. So it is something you may have to sort of deal with, but mostly the belt slot like this helps out a lot. You can have it on a chest as well. And then grabbed some temple gloves and got some accuracy, exposure, unnerve, and running Mark of the Shaper. Grabbed an Elder ring and then chaos spammed it to become this. Got pretty lucky on the chaos spam, but didn't really need the resist at the time, and I was mostly looking for accuracy, life, and then I just crafted non-channeling cost because I had a spare prefix. There's a few different ways, you know. Basically, I'd let the gear tell me what to do. I was like doing various things and then leaning into the outcomes. So because of chests like this, I went with the Scion. Because of some ailment effect, I went with that. Because of accuracy here, I could do less accuracy somewhere else. Because of the resist and suppress, etc., etc. So you kind of do sometimes just let the crafting do the work for you, and then build around that. So we've got a protector over here, which just gives me a bit of extra shit. Where's my Bladestorm there? Gives me a bit of extra attack speed, and then also, since my passive tree has a cluster and I've got 2 Megalomaniacs, this Megalomaniac has Arcane Surge when you summon a totem. I don't really use it too often, but figured it better than nothing. My Megalomaniacs have basically Prismatic Dance on both, so evasion and max res, and also Cold Pen against chill. So this entire cluster setup is pretty decent, so it's just got Blanketed Snow and then additional Leech, and I was hoping that it would be a really big addition to the build, and it kind of is if you've run out of things to do. Unfortunately, my character and my build has not run out of things to do when it comes to the passive tree, and thus a cluster setup like this is a little bit redundant. So I thought it'd be really good to get all this extra pen, and it still kind of is, but it's not the best use of gems passives if you still got things to get on the tree, and I'm very low on crit multi, so taking these nodes over here and taking these nodes up here and then the exposure node is actually basically the exact same output as all of this, and then you just grab an extra bit of life or some shit to counteract it. So this isn't a barrier for entry at all, because this kind of wasn't worth doing in the end. Realistically speaking, if I didn't do this and just did the other things, spec up to here, spec the crit multi. I'd have the same DPS. I would have spent no money, and I would have had the same amount of life. I would have had 2 less max res, basically, which I don't think really does much when you're not stacking too much of it. But yeah, that's the situation. The rest of the passive tree, I grabbed a brutal restraint that just does some stuff. So non-curse auras, proj damage, crit, something else, non-curse auras as well. So that's all that does. Bit of extra dex as well, fills out some accuracy too. We then got the Mark Master over here for frenzy charges. That's how we get frenzy on single target. And I started from Deadeye. When I was leveling this character, I just went this way. And then once I got my ascendancies, I started from Deadeye. And we took Deadeye for Mark Mastery, Tailwind, additional proj. Everything there's pretty good. And Elementalist lets us be Reflect Immune, as well as extra exposure. And the Shock, that at this point I think does 22% baseline because of all my effect. So that's pretty good stuff. And then, yeah, pretty straightforward passive tree otherwise, I think. One other thing is a Watcher's Eye with crits penetrate on Zealotry and evade grace. If I was actually going to try and make this as good as possible, I would have got a Hatred crit Watchers instead, and then that would have saved me some crit elsewhere, and that's much more powerful as well overall for the build. It probably would have saved me a link here, which means I could get like another 30 to 40% more gem. Over here we got Precision, Grace, Enlighten, and Purity of Elements. And up here we have Bone Chill attached to Vortex, and then Divine Blessing, Zealotry, Blood and Sand, Mark on Hit, Snipers, Mark. And that's the build. So I don't think it's going to be the best Cospri's build around, but it didn't cost too much and performed fairly well. Bladestorm, I think, is definitely something you can look into if you don't like Cyclone for these types of things, but you do need to fix some good attack speed and crit, as well as that Blade Flurry. Otherwise, Cyclone's kind of just the default no-brainer. So yeah, just some good alternate options here. If you're doing non-Cospris, like an Energy Blade cast on crit, Lancing Steel is something to definitely look at. Maybe Spectral Helix, that type of shit as well. So that's the build for now. Hopefully maybe some endgame on another video. Thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time.